The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes after years of knowing every sound it holds. The faint ticking of the clock in the hallway, the distant hum of the refrigerator, the soft rustle of wind against the curtains. For Emma Carter, those sounds had become the soundtrack of her evenings. She sat by the window, the glow of a small lamp warming her face as she held a half-finished book in her lap. But she wasn't reading. Her eyes drifted between the printed words and the reflection of the empty chair across from her. That chair had belonged to her husband, Mark. He'd been gone for almost 5 years now, yet the memory of his voice still filled the walls. Sometimes when she passed the kitchen late at night, she imagined she heard him humming softly the way he used to. The melody of some old tune that had long lost its name. Emma smiled faintly, not out of joy, but out of habit. The kind of small, gentle smile one gives to a memory that hurts a little less each year. Down the hall, her 17-year-old son, Ethan, was still awake. She could see the faint line of light under his door. He was probably writing again, she thought. He had always been a quiet boy, thoughtful, gentle, with that deep, restless look in his eyes that reminded her so much of Mark. She had never told him that she sometimes read the pages he left on his desk when he wasn't home. Little fragments of stories, letters to no one, words that felt too heavy for a boy his age. There was one line she remembered most. Asterisk, sometimes I feel like the world is listening, but no one really hears me. Asterisk, that line had stayed with her for weeks. She wished she knew what it meant. She wished she could ask without making him pull further away. Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, tapping against the glass like a secret trying to be heard. Emma loved the rain. It made everything feel alive again, even the silence. She leaned her head back against the chair and closed her eyes. She thought about how life had slowly become a series of quiet routines. Morning coffee, work at the library, short calls from friends, and long evenings of pretending she didn't miss the laughter that used to echo through these rooms. Sometimes she wondered if Ethan felt the same emptiness, if the silence between them had grown heavier than either dared to admit. She wanted to reach out, to ask about his dreams, his fears, his heart. But every time she tried, the words stayed trapped behind polite smiles and simple questions. How was your day? Did you eat? Do you need anything for school? Those were safe questions, the kind that didn't touch what really mattered. Tonight, though, something felt different. There was a weight in the air, a quiet pull she couldn't name, the kind that made her chest tighten without reason. She looked again toward Ethan's door. The light was still on. In that moment, she remembered a dream she once had long before life became quieter. She had always wanted to write too, before she met Mark, before the years of bills and responsibilities. She used to fill notebooks with stories she never finished. Stories about love, forgiveness, and the way people find each other again after loss. She hadn't written in years. Maybe she'd convinced herself that part of her life had passed. But sometimes, when she saw Ethan sitting by his desk, pen in hand, lost in thought, she felt that same spark flicker again inside her. A reminder of the girl she used to be, and maybe the mother she still wanted to become. The clock struck midnight. The sound echoed softly through the house. Emma glanced at the time, surprised at how late it had become. She stood, stretching gently, ready to turn off the light. That was when she heard it, a quiet knock on her door. Not loud, not hurried. Just a soft, uncertain knock that broke through the rhythm of rain. Her heart paused. It was Ethan. She knew that sound instantly, that gentle, careful tap he used when he wasn't sure if she was awake. "Mom." His voice came softly from the other side. Emma's breath caught. Something in his tone made her chest ache, a fragile mixture of fear and need. She walked to the door, each step slow, uncertain. When she opened it, Ethan stood there in his sweatshirt, hair messy, eyes glimmering in the low light. "Ethan, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice calm but trembling underneath. He hesitated. "Can I talk to you? It's kind of important." She nodded gently. "Of course. Come in." As he stepped into the room, Emma felt that same pull again, the sense that something was about to change. Ethan sat on the edge of the bed, fidgeting with his hands. For a moment, he said nothing, only stared at the floor as if the right words were hidden there. Emma waited quietly. She didn't rush him when he finally looked up. His eyes were full of something she couldn't quite read. Not anger. Not sadness, but a kind of longing she had seen before. In her own reflection years ago, I don't know how to say it, he murmured. Emma reached out, her voice steady and warm. Take your time, sweetheart. Whatever it is, I'm listening. Ethan nodded, swallowed hard, and drew in a deep breath. And in that stillness, with the rain whispering outside and the clock ticking softly behind them, Emma knew that this was not just another night. Something was unfolding. Something real. Something that would change both of their lives forever. As the rain continued outside, Emma watched Ethan sitting quietly on the edge of her bed. His shoulders were tense, his gaze fixed on the floor. She wanted to reach out to pull him into a hug, to tell him everything would be okay, but she sensed this was a moment he needed to find on his own. Before he spoke, a strange stillness filled the room, the kind that invites old memories to return. Emma felt it tug at her heart, and suddenly, years began to fold back. There was a time when she had been just like him, full of thoughts she couldn't explain, dreams she couldn't name. She had grown up in a small coastal town, where the sea air always carried a hint of salt and promise. Back then, she worked at a tiny bookstore that smelled of old paper and morning coffee. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She used to spend her quiet hours arranging books by color, pretending each shelf was a new beginning, and that's where she met Mark. He wasn't like anyone else she knew, tall, thoughtful, with a kindness that felt unshakable. He came in one rainy afternoon, looking for a book of poems his late mother had loved. His voice was gentle, his smile uncertain. Emma remembered how he stood there, running a hand through his hair, apologizing for not remembering the title. She had laughed softly, assuring him she would find it. She did, and when she handed it to him, their fingers brushed just slightly. It was such a small thing, yet she never forgot it. They talked for a long time that day about books, the smell of rain, and how both of them loved the sound of waves at night. When he left, she thought that was the end of it. But he returned the next day, and the one after that. Sometimes he didn't even buy anything. He would just sit on the old wooden stool near the window, pretending to read while watching her rearrange the shelves. They talked about everything, their favorite songs, the places they wanted to see, and the quiet fears they never told anyone else. Emma used to write in her notebook after he left. Little notes like, asterisk, he smiled again today. I wish I could tell him how that made me feel. Asterisk, it wasn't love at first sight. It was something softer. Something that grew slowly, like the tide rising with each day. When he finally asked her out for coffee, she almost said no. She was afraid of losing the quiet friendship they had built, afraid of wanting something that might not last. But she went, and that evening turned into 100 others, each one woven with laughter, shared secrets, and the kind of connection that didn't need words. Years later, when Ethan was born, their home was full of warmth. Mark used to sing lullabies in a low voice, his arms wrapped around the tiny bundle that would grow into the boy sitting before her now. Emma could still see it. The way Mark's eyes softened whenever Ethan smiled. The way he'd whisper, "He's going to have your heart." Emma, I can already tell. But life, as it always does, shifted. Mark's health had started to fade quietly, almost politely, as if it didn't want to intrude. There were doctor visits, unspoken worries, and long nights when Emma stayed awake listening to his breathing, terrified it would stop. When he passed, the house fell into a silence so deep that even time seemed to hesitate for years. Emma carried that silence with her, wearing it like a coat she couldn't take off. She stopped writing, stopped dreaming. Even laughter began to sound strange in her own voice. But Ethan, sweet, gentle Ethan, had his father's soul. He didn't speak of his grief much, but she saw it in his eyes, in the way he sometimes sat by the window as if waiting for something that never came, and now, sitting before her, he looked almost exactly as Mark once did, quiet, searching, carrying something heavy in his heart that he hadn't yet learned to name. Emma blinked back the memories as Ethan finally began to speak. "Mom," he said softly, his voice trembling, "do you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" She met his gaze. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing toward the window where rain blurred the streetlights into gentle streaks of gold. "Everyone keeps saying I should know what I want by now, that I should follow a plan. But what if that plan doesn't feel right?" Emma's heart clenched. She could almost hear Mark's voice again, the one that used to tell her, asterisk, "Let him be who he is. He'll find his way." Asterisk, she took a slow breath. "It's okay not to have it all figured out, Ethan. You don't have to know everything right now." He looked up, eyes glistening. "But I feel like I'm letting everyone down." Her voice softened. "You could never let me down." He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I wish Dad could hear that." For a long moment, they sat together in silence. The rain had stopped, and only the distant dripping of water from the eaves remained. Emma reached for his hand, just as she had once reached for Mark's, and in that simple touch, warm, steady, and wordless, the years seemed to fold again. The love that had once begun in a small bookstore still lived here, quietly, in the bond between mother and son. Outside, the moon slipped out from behind the clouds, lighting the room in soft silver. Emma looked at Ethan and thought, asterisk, the past never truly leaves us. It just echoes in the people we love. Asterisk, morning sunlight filtered softly through the curtains, painting golden lines across the carpet. The storm had passed, leaving the air fresh and calm. Emma stood in the kitchen, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. She could still feel the quiet weight of the conversation from the night before. Ethan's uncertain voice, his questions, the ache in his eyes. He hadn't said everything yet. She could tell. There was still more he carried inside, but she also knew he needed time to find his own way to share it. When he came into the kitchen, still half asleep and tousle-haired, she smiled. "Morning, sweetheart. How'd you sleep?" Ethan gave a soft shrug. "Better than I expected." She handed him the mug. "That's something." He smiled faintly and took a sip. The kitchen was filled with quiet clinks of ceramic and the faint hum of morning radio, a familiar, comforting sound that felt like home. As they sat at the table, Ethan's phone buzzed. He looked down, reading a message that made his expression change not sharply, but subtly, as if something within him stirred. "Everything okay?" Emma asked gently. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, just something from school. Actually from the writing club." Her eyebrows lifted. "Oh, I didn't know you were still involved." "Yeah," he said softly. "They're doing this community project, interviewing people about memories, old letters, stories that changed their lives. Mrs. Parker asked if I'd help." "That sounds wonderful," Emma said, smiling. "You've always had a gift for listening to people's hearts." He laughed lightly. "She said I should start by interviewing someone from the neighborhood. Someone with history. Did you have anyone in mind?" He looked thoughtful for a moment. "Maybe Mr. Lawson," he said. "The one who runs the old bookstore on Main Street." Emma's smile froze for a heartbeat. The bookstore. She hadn't been there in nearly 2 decades. "Mr. Lawson?" she repeated softly. "He's still around?" Ethan nodded. "Yeah, I went by once last year. It's still there. Feels kind of magical, honestly." For a moment, Emma was quiet. The name, the place, the memories, they all came back like a soft wave washing over her heart. "That little bookstore where everything had begun? Maybe I'll come with you," she said without thinking. Ethan looked surprised. "You want to come?" She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "It's been a long time since I've seen that place. It might be nice." That afternoon, the air carried the crisp scent of autumn. The bookstore stood on the corner of Main and Willow, the same wooden sign swinging gently above the door. Time had worn its edges, but it still had the same quiet charm, the scent of paper and dust, the rows of mismatched shelves, the warmth that felt like memory itself as they entered. A small bell rang above the door. Ethan wandered off toward the fiction section while Emma stood near the front. "Okay, her eyes tracing the familiar corners. For a moment she could almost see herself there again, a younger woman arranging stacks of books, glancing toward a kind man who smiled from across the room. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the feeling wash over her. Emma. Her heart skipped. She turned. Behind the counter stood a woman about her age, kind eyes, silver streaks in her hair. "It's been years, hasn't it?" the woman said, smiling. Emma blinked, then laughed softly. "Claire, oh my goodness, you're still here." Claire chuckled. "Still running this place somehow? When Mark left the store, he said you might come by again one day. I kept hoping you would." The mention of his name sent a soft ache through Emma's chest. Not painful, just deeply human. "He said that?" she whispered. Claire nodded. "He loved this place. Said it reminded him of how you met." Emma smiled gently. It was his favorite spot. They spoke quietly for a few minutes about the old days, about how much had changed and how much hadn't. When Ethan came over holding a book, Claire's eyes softened as she looked at him. "You must be Ethan," she said warmly. "You have your father's eyes." Ethan smiled shyly. "You knew him?" "Everyone who came here knew him," Claire said kindly. "He had a way of making people feel seen." Ethan's expression shifted, touched by the thought. "I wish I remembered him more." Claire reached behind the counter, pulling out a small worn notebook. "He used to write in this when business was slow. I found it tucked under one of the old drawers. I think it belongs to you." Emma stared at it, stunned. The leather cover was cracked, edges frayed, but she recognized it instantly. Mark's handwriting was still visible on the front. Asterisk for stories I never finished. Asterisk. Her breath trembled. "I didn't know this still existed." Claire smiled softly. "I think he wanted it to find its way back to you when the time was right." Emma accepted the notebook with careful hands, feeling its weight not just of paper and ink, but of everything she thought she had lost. Ethan watched quietly, his heart full but unable to speak. Something in his mother's eyes changed, a spark. Faint, yet unmistakable. They left the bookstore in silence, the golden afternoon light falling gently across the street. Emma held the notebook close to her chest, her fingers tracing the worn edges. "Mom," Ethan said softly as they reached the car, "do you think he meant for us to find it?" She smiled through misted eyes. "Maybe he never really left anything to chance." As they drove home, the autumn leaves swirled behind them, catching the sunlight like small, drifting memories, reminders that love, even when quiet, never truly fades. That night, the house was quiet again, but this time, the silence felt different, softer, almost peaceful. The rain had returned, brushing against the windows like a lullaby. Emma sat on the couch with the old leather notebook resting on her lap. The lamplight cast a warm circle around her, making the faded pages glow like they carried their own quiet light. Ethan sat beside her, legs folded, a blanket draped loosely over his shoulders. Neither had spoken much since leaving the bookstore. Words weren't needed, they were both waiting. Sensing that something unspoken was ready to be heard, Emma opened the notebook carefully. The first few pages were filled with Mark's familiar handwriting, neat, patient strokes that tilted slightly to the right. She began to read aloud. "Greater than asterisk, if someday Ethan finds these pages. I hope he knows that life isn't about following every rule or every plan. It's about finding the courage to listen to your heart even when no one else understands." Emma's voice wavered, but she continued. "Greater than when I met Emma, she reminded me that love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet in the way someone listens, or the way they stay when it's easier to leave." Asterisk. She paused, pressing her lips together. A tear slipped down her cheek before she could stop it. Ethan reached over and gently took her hand. "You don't have to read it all now," he said softly. She smiled through her tears. "I want to." They read together for a while, passages about small moments, everyday joys and dreams Mark had never spoken aloud. Near the end of the notebook, Kema found a page that made her heart tighten. "Greater than asterisk, if Ethan ever loses his way. Remind him that the stories inside him matter. Remind him that he doesn't need to be anyone else to make me proud." Asterisk when she finished, the room was silent except for the rain. Ethan leaned back, eyes glistening, his voice barely above a whisper. He really understood me, even before I knew myself. Emma looked at him, her chest full and aching all at once. He always did. And so do I. He turned toward her, searching her face. Mom, can I tell you the rest of what I couldn't say last night? She nodded gently. I've been accepted to a summer writing program, said, exhaling the words like he'd been holding them for months. It's in another city, and it starts in a few weeks. But I didn't tell you because I didn't know if you'd want me to go. Emma blinked, surprise and pride washing through her at once. Ethan, that's incredible. Why wouldn't I want you to go? He looked down. Because it feels like leaving you behind. And I know you've been alone since Dad. He trailed off. I didn't want to make the house emptier. Her heart swelled, not with sadness, but with the deep, tender ache that only love can bring. She reached out, cupping his cheek. Ethan, your father and I built this home so you could grow beyond it. That's what every parent hopes for. He looked up, eyes shimmering. You mean it? Of course, she said softly. I'll miss you every day. But I'll be proud every day too. He smiled, a real one this time, the kind that came from somewhere deep. I was so afraid you'd be disappointed. Emma shook her head gently. The only thing that would ever disappoint me is if you stopped believing in yourself. For a long moment, they sat together, mother and son, holding the weight of love and loss between them. Then, slowly, Ethan leaned his head on her shoulder. Outside. The rain began to fade, replaced by the sound of wind rustling through the trees. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. Ethan stood by the window with his backpack ready, the acceptance letter tucked carefully inside. Emma watched him with quiet pride, her heart steady despite the sting of goodbye. When he turned to her, she smiled. You'll do great things, Ethan. And wherever you go, remember, you're never really alone. He hugged her tightly. Thank you, Mom, for everything. When the door finally closed and his footsteps faded down the path, Emma stood for a while, letting the quiet fill the space again. But this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt alive. She looked down at the notebook on the table. Opening it once more, she turned to the last blank page, and for the first time in years, she picked up a pen. She wrote asterisk, he's ready now, and so am I. Asterisk then, she smiled. Not the small, careful smile of someone remembering loss, but the open, peaceful one of someone ready to begin again, outside. The morning sun touched the edges of the world in gold, and somewhere in that light, Emma felt that Mark was still with them, not in words or memories, but in every heartbeat that carried forward. The night her son came to her with his secret had indeed changed everything, not because of what was revealed, but because it reminded them both of what love truly means: to listen, to understand, and to let go when it's time.